No one in the courtroom expected what happened next. Not on a gray Tuesday morning when the benches were half filled. The air smelled faintly of old paper and winter coats, and a soft drizzle tapped against the courthouse windows. But when the doors opened and the young man walked in, head low, hands trembling, dressed in clothes that looked too expensive for his posture, something shifted in the room. Even before anyone spoke, there was a quiet tension. A story was hiding behind his silence. Judge Frank Caprio had seen thousands of cases in this very courtroom, decades of faces and voices blending into the fabric of his memory. But the moment he glanced at the defendant's file, something caught him. A name, a reputation, a shadow of a headline he remembered reading months earlier. A celebrity chef, America's beloved culinary icon, whose TV smile had fed millions. And now, his son stood before him. The charge, disorderly conduct and public harassment. The incident, throwing a plate of food at a waiter during a private event. But Judge Caprio could sense immediately. This case wasn't what it appeared to be. The young man's eyes weren't angry. They were hollow, bruised from something deeper than a single outburst. Something was off, but the courtroom didn't know what yet. The clerk called out, "Case number 14-2661, Defendant Ethan Morelli." A quiet murmur spread through the benches. A few people recognized the last name. Cameras clicked softly. News outlets had tried to swarm this case days earlier, but Judge Caprio had restricted the room, allowing only minimal coverage. He didn't like spectacle. He liked truth. Ethan stepped forward. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Good morning, Your Honor." Judge Caprio lifted his eyes slowly, studying him. Not the way tabloids studied him, not with judgment, but with a calm, deliberate understanding that only comes from years of listening. "Good morning, Mr. Morelli," he said, his voice warm but steady. "You're charged with disorderly conduct stemming from an altercation during a private dining event. Before we proceed, I want you to know, this court is a place for truth. Not fear, not appearances, just truth. Are you prepared to tell it?" Ethan swallowed hard. I think so." Judge Caprio nodded gently, sensing the fragility behind that answer. The courtroom was unusually silent. The police report painted a simple picture. Ethan was attending a high-profile charity event his father catered. A waiter placed a dish in front of him. Witnesses claimed Ethan became irritated over its temperature, stood up, yelled, and threw the plate at the waiter, who ended up slipping on the spilled food and injuring his knee. Cut and dry. But people who commit simple acts of anger rarely walk into a courtroom carrying grief like Ethan's. Judge Caprio felt it immediately. A quiet suffering, like someone trying to breathe with a weight on their chest. "Mr. Morelli," the judge said, folding his hands atop the bench, "these charges carry potential fines and a record that can follow you. But more important than that, something about this doesn't quite add up for me." Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Judge Caprio continued, "Before I hear from the prosecution, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me what happened that night." Ethan hesitated. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, caught somewhere between guilt and fear. "It's not as simple as what the report says," he whispered. The entire courtroom leaned in. Judge Caprio wasn't the type to rush a story. He knew people opened up slowly, like doors swollen from years of rain. He observed Ethan the way a doctor might examine a patient, not to judge his mistakes, but to understand the wound underneath. He thought of all the defendants who had stood there before him with their stories of poverty, struggle, loss, addiction, desperation. Rarely was the real issue the one written in ink. The truth lived in the pauses, the trembling hands, the way someone inhaled before speaking. He softened his tone. "Take your time, my son. You're safe here." Those words landed with unexpected force. Ethan's shoulders sank. As if a heavy armor finally loosened, Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, allowing the moment to breathe. Inside his mind, a quiet reflection flickered. Fame protects no one from pain. Titles don't shield a heart from breaking. It started slowly. "My father," Ethan whispered, voice thinning. "People think they know him. They see him smiling on TV, calling audiences his family, making heartwarming dishes every Sunday night. They don't see him when the cameras turn off." The room stiffened. Judge Caprio nodded gently. "Go on." "For years he's been different at home. The pressure, the businesses, the reputation he has to maintain. And then my mom's death last year." The judge's expression shifted instantly, soft sympathy in his eyes. Ethan's voice quivered. She was the only person who could calm him, the only one he listened to. After she died, he changed, and he expected me to step into her role, to manage him, to fix him, to be the emotional adult in the house. A quiet gasp rippled faintly among the courtroom benches. Ethan wiped his eyes quickly. "I tried, I really did, but he'd lose his temper over anything. The way I walked, the way I dressed, the way I breathed. I became invisible unless he needed someone to blame." Judge Caprio felt something tighten in his chest. Ethan continued. "At the charity event, he told me before we went in, 'Don't embarrass me. Don't make me look weak.' He said it right in the parking lot, like I was a walking liability." He blinked rapidly, fighting the weight of old humiliation. "And the waiter?" Ethan swallowed. "He didn't do anything wrong. I swear he didn't. The plate wasn't cold. The food wasn't bad. I didn't throw it because of him." A stunned stillness filled the court. "Then why?" Judge Caprio asked softly. Ethan hesitated, and then the truth cracked open. "Because my father told me, 2 minutes before it happened, that I was the reason Mom died." A few people gasped. A woman in the second row clasped her hand to her chest. Judge Caprio's eyes narrowed with deep sorrow. "He said she worried herself sick over me, that I ruined her health, that she would still be alive if I wasn't such a burden." Ethan's voice collapsed into a quiet tremor. "And something in me snapped. Not at him, because I'm too scared to snap at him. So when the waiter came over, smiling, being kind, I just lost control. I saw myself spilling the plate, not at the waiter, but at everything inside me that I couldn't handle anymore. I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at myself." A single tear broke loose from Ethan's eye. The courtroom was silent. Not the stiff, formal kind of silence, but the heavy, breathing kind that happens when strangers share the same heartbreak. Judge Caprio felt the truth settle inside him like a stone sinking into water. This was not a case about disrespect, he thought. This was a cry from someone drowning in silence. And for a long moment, no one spoke. The courtroom didn't move. Not a shuffle, not a cough, not even the rustle of a coat. Every pair of eyes rested on Ethan, watching a young man unravel in the witness box. Not with drama, but with a quiet devastation that felt tragically familiar to anyone who had ever carried a burden too heavy for their years. Judge Caprio let the air settle before he spoke again. His voice was soft, careful, as though he were placing words into the hands of someone who might break if they were too heavy. "Ethan, how long have you been carrying this alone?" Ethan exhaled shakily. "Since Mom got sick. Maybe before that." "Did you ever talk to anyone? A friend? A counselor?" "No," he whispered. "Any time I tried to open up, my father said I was being dramatic. He'd say, 'Real men don't complain.' And when Mom passed," Ethan's voice faltered, "he made me feel like my sadness was a weakness, like missing her made me defective." Judge Caprio's head lowered slightly. A familiar ache surfaced in him, the memory of people he'd seen over the years who learned early on that their tears were liabilities, that their grief had to be hidden like contraband. "And the night of the event," the judge asked gently, Did your father see what happened?" Ethan nodded. He saw everything. "What did he do?" Ethan seemed to shrink. "He didn't help the waiter. He didn't talk to me. He just grabbed my wrist hard and whispered, 'You humiliated me.'" A soft murmur spread through the courtroom. Anger, disbelief, sympathy, all mixing together. Judge Caprio studied the boy. Not entitled, not spoiled, not the reckless celebrity son the tabloids painted him to be. No, Ethan Morelli was a young man trembling under years of emotional erosion, shaped not by luxury, but by loneliness. The judge took a measured breath. "I want to hear from the waiter," he said quietly. "Is he present today?" A man in his 30s stood from the second row, tall, with a gentle posture and a knee brace visible beneath his slacks. He looked nervous. The bailiff guided him to the front. "State your name," Judge Caprio said. "Danielle Ortiz, Your Honor." "Mr. Ortiz, thank you for being here. I know it isn't easy to revisit a difficult night. I want you to describe, in your own words, what you saw and how you experienced it." Daniel nodded, folding his hands. "Well, I brought Mr. Morelli's plate to him. He looked stressed, really stressed, not angry." He hesitated. "More like someone who was trying not to cry. When I set the dish down, he didn't yell. He just broke. Like something inside him snapped clean in half." Ethan lowered his head, ashamed. Daniel continued. "The plate hit the floor, and so did I. It hurt, sure, but I wasn't mad at him." He turned toward Ethan, his voice softening. "I saw your face, kid. You weren't trying to hurt me. You were hurting, and it exploded." The court fell even quieter. Daniel looked back at Judge Caprio. His father didn't check on me, not once. He only looked at Ethan, and honestly, it reminded me of my own dad. Judge Caprio raised an eyebrow gently, inviting him to continue. "My father was strict, the type of man who thought discipline meant silence. If I slipped, even a little, he'd shame me in front of strangers. I remember being 15 and dropping a tray at his restaurant. He grabbed the back of my neck in front of customers and told me I was an embarrassment." A flicker of shared pain crossed Ethan's eyes. Daniel sighed. "So when I saw Ethan cry, even after throwing the plate, I knew that look. I've had that look." Judge Caprio felt something shift in the room. A connection, unexpected, human, redemptive, was forming in real time. "Mr. Ortiz," the judge said, "are you pressing charges?" Daniel shook his head firmly. "No, Your Honor. I never wanted punishment. I wanted understanding. The injury healed. But I don't think Ethan has." A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek. "And if I may, Your Honor," Daniel added hesitantly, "I don't think his father is helping him heal." A ripple traveled across the benches, half shock, half agreement. Judge Caprio allowed the words to linger in the air, letting their emotional weight soak into the truth of the moment. "Thank you, Mr. Ortiz," he said gently. "You may be seated." Daniel nodded, limping back to his place. Judge Caprio turned back to Ethan. "Son, I need to ask you something important, and I want you to answer honestly." Ethan nodded, bracing himself. "Have you ever been hurt, physically or emotionally, by your father?" Ethan's breath caught. His eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. He swallowed hard, fingers twisting nervously in front of him. I don't want to get him in trouble." A quiet sadness crossed Judge Caprio's face. "Ethan, this is not about trouble. This is about truth, and the truth will help me understand what truly happened that night." Ethan closed his eyes, and then, for the first time since the hearing began, his voice cracked openly. "He's never hit me," Ethan whispered. "Not the way people imagine, but the things he says. They cut deeper than fists." His eyes lifted toward the judge, raw, pleading. "He tells me I'm weak, that I'll never live up to him, that I'm a disappointment, that Mom would still be alive His voice shattered mid-sentence. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Caprio watched him with a gaze that blended empathy with decades of wisdom. He had heard many stories, too many, of quiet emotional wounds, but hearing it from a young man who had grown up under the glare of public admiration for his father made it particularly painful. "And does he ever apologize?" the judge asked softly. Ethan shook his head. "No. He says dads don't apologize to their sons." A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Judge Caprio let out a long, slow exhale. He could feel the weight of Ethan's childhood pressing against the edges of the courtroom. Pain layered in years. Expectations sharpened into weapons. A boy forced to grow up in the shadow of a man the world worshipped but he feared. And then, the twist no one expected. Ethan took a trembling breath. "Your Honor, the night of the event, when the plate fell," his voice dropped to a whisper, "I wasn't the only one who snapped." Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated. Then he said it. "My father grabbed me by the back of my neck so hard afterward that I couldn't move it for days. He said if I ever embarrassed him again, he'd cut me out of his life for good. No money, no support, nothing." A wave of shock rolled across the courtroom. Ethan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I know he provides for me. I know people think I'm privileged. But at home, I don't feel rich. I feel owned." Judge Caprio's heart tightened. That line, "I feel owned," echoed painfully in the silence. Frank Caprio had lived long enough to know that emotional wounds did not discriminate between the wealthy and the poor. He had seen children from broken homes and children from mansions carry the same hollowed-out gaze when love turned to pressure, when expectation became dominance. In his mind, a quiet reflection stirred. Children, no matter their parents' fame, deserve tenderness, guidance, compassion, not fear. He thought of his own father, the gentleness in his voice, the soft discipline, the way he had taught him that strength came from kindness, not control. He thought of all the parents who forgot that their children were human beings, not trophies. And he thought of Ethan, standing there like a young tree bent by too many storms, still trying to grow upright. Judge Caprio tapped his pen lightly, gathering his thoughts. This case had stopped being about a thrown plate long ago. It had become about a deeper question, the kind that gnaws quietly at the conscience. How do we judge someone who has never been given the chance to be whole? He lifted his eyes toward Ethan again, and what he saw wasn't defiance. It was a boy begging for a moment of mercy. Judge Caprio folded his hands, letting the courtroom silence breathe before he spoke again. His voice, when it came, carried the steady calm of a man who had seen countless storms, inside and outside these walls. "Ethan," he said softly, "I want to ask you something. One last question before I render my decision." Ethan lifted his eyes, terrified but willing. The judge leaned forward slightly. "What do you want? Not what your father wants, not what the newspapers want, not what the world expects of a celebrity chef's son. What does Ethan Morelli want from life? From himself, from this moment?" The question stunned the room. Ethan blinked, lost. I don't know." "Then take a moment," Judge Caprio said gently, "because that answer matters more than any charge on this paper." Ethan closed his eyes. His chest rose slowly, then fell, the way a person breathes when searching inside themselves for a truth they've never dared to touch. After a long pause, his voice nearly broke. "I want peace," he whispered. "I want to feel like I'm allowed to exist without being afraid. I want to wake up and not hear his voice in my head telling me I'm nothing." His lips trembled. "And I want to stop hurting people because I don't know how else to let the pain out." A heavy exhale rippled through the room. Soft sighs, muffled sniffles, even a few bowed heads from strangers overwhelmed by the honesty of it. Judge Caprio took in Ethan's words with a slow nod, the weight of responsibility pressing gently but firmly onto his shoulders. From the side benches, the prosecutor rose, a middle-aged woman with a stern face but kind eyes. "Your Honor," she said softly, "given the testimony and the emotional circumstances, the state is willing to recommend leniency." Judge Caprio raised a hand gently. "I appreciate your input, Counselor, but this decision requires something deeper than leniency. It requires understanding." The prosecutor nodded respectfully and sat back down. Ethan watched the judge, almost frightened by the stillness in his expression. Not disappointed, not angry, but contemplating, deeply, sincerely. Judge Caprio rested his palms on the bench. "Mr. Morelli, your actions that night were wrong. A man was injured, even if unintentionally. The law requires accountability, but accountability is not the same as condemnation." He paused, letting the principle settle in the air. "This court does not exist to shame. It exists to guide." Ethan's throat tightened. And if a young man is breaking under the pressure of a father who confuses control with care— Judge Caprio's eyes softened. "Then perhaps the person who needs correction isn't only the one standing in front of me." The courtroom stirred. Surprise, admiration, truth. In his mind, the judge went inward once more, into that quiet chamber where wisdom forged itself through decades of listening to people at their lowest. Some children learn to shout. Some learn to hide. Some, like Ethan, learn to fracture silently until the pieces scatter in unexpected ways. How many adults walk the world wounded because someone told them their voice was too small, their worth too fragile, their heart too sensitive? How many are punished for symptoms when no one looks for the cause? Judge Caprio inhaled deeply. Justice without compassion is a hammer. Compassion without accountability is a feather. But justice with compassion, that's a guiding hand. He opened his eyes, and the courtroom fell absolutely still. "Mr. Morelli," Judge Caprio began, "please step forward." Ethan approached the bench slowly, trembling. The judge looked directly into his eyes, not at the fame, not at the privilege, but at the suffering kid behind it all. "This court finds you responsible for the offense," he said. Ethan's breath caught. "But the punishment will reflect not just the act, but the man standing before me today." A faint tear rolled down Ethan's cheek. Judge Caprio continued, "You will not receive a fine. You will not receive probation, and you will certainly not receive jail time." A stunned silence washed over the room. "Instead," the judge said gently, "I'm ordering you to attend 12 weeks of emotional wellness counseling. Real counseling, with a professional, not someone chosen by your father. This court will help arrange it." Ethan stared at him, shocked, grateful, overwhelmed. "You will also complete 40 hours of community service at a public dining center," the judge added, "not to punish you, but to remind you that serving others is not a burden. It is a grounding place where dignity grows." Ethan nodded rapidly, tears falling freely now. "And finally," Judge Caprio said, lowering his voice, "I am requesting that you write a letter, not to your father, not to this court, but to yourself." Ethan looked up, confused. "A letter," the judge clarified, "forgiving yourself for what you have endured, for the things said to you, for the belief that you are the cause of someone else's pain. That letter will not be public. It is for your heart, not for the headlines." Ethan pressed both hands to his face as quiet sobs shook him. Judge Caprio's tone softened to a near whisper. "You are not a burden, Ethan. You are a young man who has survived more than most will ever understand. And today, I refuse to let this courtroom be another place where you are made to feel small." A woman in the gallery cried openly. Even the bailiff blinked rapidly, looking away. Judge Caprio continued, voice warm and unwavering. "This is your moment to step into a life defined not by your father's shadow, but by your own courage. And courage," he said gently, "comes in many forms, but the bravest among them is healing." Ethan broke down completely then, shoulders shaking. Daniel Ortiz, the waiter, quietly stood and placed a hand over his heart, silently offering forgiveness. Judge Caprio lifted his gavel. "Case resolved, Mr. Morelli. Go become the man your mother hoped you would be." A single, powerful strike echoed through the courtroom. As Ethan left the courtroom, several people instinctively stepped aside, not because he was famous, but because heartbreak and courage had made him human in their eyes. Daniel approached him, offering a quiet nod of solidarity. Ethan managed a fragile smile. Judge Caprio watched them while gathering his papers. These moments, he knew, were why he still sat on the bench after all these years. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about seeing people, truly seeing them, even when they could not see themselves. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Sunlight cut through the clouds in thin, golden lines, brushing gently against the courthouse steps. And somewhere beneath that soft light, a young man who once felt owned took his first quiet step toward owning himself. Because sometimes the most powerful verdict is not a sentence, but a second chance.